Hi writers! Thank you for opening up the first of two presentations on subject-verb agreement. This is a tricky grammar topic, so we are going to first start off with some of the basic rules. So first we need to look at parts of a sentence, which include a subject and a verb. We need to identify those before we can identify the proper verb that goes with the subject. So our subject is always a noun, which is a person, place, or thing, and it's the noun that is the doer in the sentence, completing the verb, which describes an action, a state, or an occurrence. So let's look at identifying a subject and verb in a sentence. Using our example sentence, Tom identifies the subject and verb of a sentence before checking agreement. I always suggest eliminating your prepositional phrases first. So if you can see here, I've crossed out of a sentence and before checking agreement. And I do that because your subject and verb will never be in a prepositional phrase. Now we only have to look at that first part. Tom identifies the subject and verb. We identify Tom, our subject, which is singular, who is completing the action, which is identifies. From there, we can determine if we have the correct subject and verb, and this is a skill you should use when you are editing and looking over your own essays. So let's look at some general rules here for subject-verb agreement. Singular subjects get singular verbs, and plural subjects get plural verbs. Well, that's very simplistic. Let's look a little bit more in depth here. Let's use a sample subject, student. Student is singular. So student would get a singular verb. And when it's an action verb, singular, think S for singular, ends in S or ES, which would bring us to our verb takes. The student takes notes. Let's look at the same example, making our subject plural, students. Our verb now changes to a plural version of a verb, which does not end in S or ES and becomes take. The students take notes. Now it's a little bit more complicated than that, so let's look at some general present tense singular verbs. Not all verbs are action verbs. If you look here, we have is, am, was, has, does, and then our verbs ending in S or ending in ES. Our plural version over on the other side contains the verbs are, were, have, do, and then verbs ending without S or ES. Let's look a little bit more in depth with singular verbs. Using the examples from the other slide, we have some sample sentences here. Sarah is one person, she is singular, so she gets that verb is in the sentence, Sarah is an excellent student. Now, watch out for this little pronoun I. It gets a little tricky here. You would not say I is an excellent student. This version always turns to am when you're talking about I. You also would not use another noun or pronoun with that word am. Here we have some examples using singular subjects with our singular verbs. It'd be a good idea to pause the video for a moment and look over each just to make sure you're entirely clear. One thing to note is that words like class, which contain multiple members, are still singular because you're talking about the unit as a whole. This is the same when you talk about a school or a team or any group, even if it contains many people or many things in it. It gets a singular verb. Another thing to draw your attention to, that pronoun I again sometimes gets a plural verb. So even though our first example, Jen, singular, wishes she woke up earlier, you'll see that in the same sentence when we have that subject I, the verb becomes wish, which is our plural version. This word gets a little tricky because it tends to take the plural in a number of ways with other verbs. It takes the singular here, I was quarterback. However, it would be I have an hour. I do the dishes. I sing in my school choir. So it gets a little tricky with the word I. Let's take a look at examples using the plural versions. They are excellent students. Ty and Mike were on the football team. Now, Ty is singular and Mike is singular, but notice that two or more singular or plural nouns joined by and make a plural subject because you have two guys here. Here you have some other examples, and it might be beneficial for you to pause and look this over. Please note that the pronoun you always gets a plural verb, whether it applies to the singular or plural. So even though I'm talking to what I presume to be one of you at a time, the example here, you are currently learning about subject-verb agreement. That word are stays plural regardless of how many yous I'm speaking to. You catch the ball. Watch out for inverted word order. Here, there, and where are never going to be your subjects. So when they start a sentence, you know automatically that you have to cross that out. So here are the envelopes you requested. Well, are is our verb. What are envelopes are? There walks my neighbor. Who walks? Neighbor walks. Where does he think he is going? Does think. Who does think? He does think. Also remember, subjects and verbs are never in prepositional phrases, so cross out prepositional phrases to find the true subject. Down the street starts our sentence, but we cross that out. Now we have our verb is. What is? House is. Cross out the phrase that begins this sentence. Are children playing? Who are playing? Children are playing. And make sure you realize that words like children, people, men, and women are always plural, so they always get plural verbs. Make sure you also watch out for interrupting phrases. Make sure you're not just looking at the word that is closest to the verb. So here we have the athletes together with their coach take the field. Cross out with their coach, and immediately you find athletes, which is plural, so you have take. English, cross out, in addition to psychology and sociology, is my favorite language. Now, subject. Now, you're talking about multiple subjects here, but because two of them are in prepositional phrases, you have one left as your subject, so you get a singular verb. Here we have another example, Tom along with his two sisters. Now, multiple people are staying up late, but sisters is in that prepositional phrase, so grammatically, we just have Tom as our subject, which gets that singular verb with an S. Also, little quick lesson, infinitive phrases are just phrases that contain to in a verb. They're never the main verb, so be careful about that. There is more. A lot of exceptions to the rule. English is a tricky language, so once you feel like you've got a firm grip on this lesson, please check out the next video, Subject-Verb Agreement, where it gets complicated. And as always, check us out in the Writing Center. We can help you if you need any more help. Happy writing, everyone.